In a time before time, when the earth still held the silence of Eden, and the stars had not yet grown old, there was a land wrapped in stillness. The hills bowed gently as though in prayer, and rivers sang psalms in tongues lost to man. In that land walked a man whose name the world has long forgotten, but whose footsteps are etched into eternity. His name was Elias, a shepherd by trade, a seeker by soul. He did not possess scrolls of learning, nor sit in the courts of kings. Yet the heavens watched him with great interest, for while many walked by sight, trusting in what they could see and touch, Elias had begun to listen to a voice that could not be heard, to follow a light that no eye could see. The journey he undertook would never be recorded in temple archives, but it would be carved into the heart of faith itself. For Elias was chosen, not because he was mighty, but because he was willing to be led into the unseen. The sun rose slow and gold over the sand-blushed hills of the southern borderlands. Elias stood at the edge of his flock, staff in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. His sheep grazed peacefully, their bleating soft like the murmur of prayer. Around him the earth exhaled heat, silence, and mystery. He had lived alone since his parents' passing, good, God-fearing people who had spoken of the Most High with reverence. Yet they had also warned him, "The Lord often hides in silence. Do not mistake absence for abandonment." It was a lesson Elias had come to understand deeply. His days passed in routine simplicity, tending sheep, watching the skies, whispering prayers into the breeze. Yet deep within, something stirred. A yearning, a holy unrest, a whisper he could not silence. That morning, as he knelt beside a stream to drink, the whisper became a word. "Come." Elias froze. The water rippled before him, but the wind had stilled. The word was not shouted, nor even spoken. It entered him like breath into dry bones. He looked around, nothing, only the empty hills and the faint bleating of distant lambs. He stood slowly, wiping his hands. The staff in his grip trembled. Again the word came, not louder, but deeper. "Come, leave all that you know. Walk where I lead. Trust what you cannot see." He staggered backward. "Who are you?" he whispered. There was no reply, only silence, sacred, weighty, alive. He returned home at evening, but something had changed. The call haunted him. Day after day, he felt it like a tide pulling at his soul, until one night, under a blanket of stars, Elias stood outside his tent and whispered into the sky, "I will come," and with those 3 words the path was opened. Elias packed lightly, a satchel of bread, a flask of water, a worn copy of the Psalms. He left his flock in the care of a neighbor and walked into the wilderness with no map, no promise, only the strange peace that settled on him like morning dew. But faith does not rise without resistance. The first days were simple. His feet carried him over familiar trails. His eyes found comfort in the rhythm of sky and soul. Yet with each step, the land grew stranger. Trees gave way to stone, paths vanished. Familiar voices faded. By the 5th day, he was utterly alone, and with the solitude came questions. "Why have you brought me here?" he asked one morning, kneeling beside a dry stream. No answer. The silence was thick now, not serene, but severe. He missed the songs of birds, the warmth of fires, even the sound of human speech. Doubt crept in, quiet and persistent. Did I imagine the voice? Am I a fool walking to nowhere? He looked around at the endless rocks, the parched land stretching like eternity. His eyes could see nothing of promise, no signs, no visions, no path forward. That night, beneath a moonless sky, Elias sat and wept. It was not the weeping of fear, but of surrender, the kind that strips a man of every illusion. And in that broken moment, a soft wind moved across his face. It brought no words, no instructions, only presence. It was enough. The next morning, Elias woke to silence, but his heart was steadier. The journey was no longer about signs or assurances. It had become about trust. He tied a cloth over his eyes. This act was not madness, it was obedience. He had come to realize sight had become his crutch. As long as he looked, he relied on what was seen, but the voice had called him to walk by faith, not by sight. And so, blindfolded, guided only by his staff and the inner stirring of grace, Elias walked. He stumbled, fell, skinned his knees on stones he couldn't see, but he did not turn back. People he passed mocked him. A blind man in the wilderness. Where is your God now? Elias smiled. Though they could not see it, he is nearer than your breath. They laughed, but he kept walking. Days passed, weeks, the sun burned, the nights froze, but Elias learned to follow a rhythm deeper than vision. He would stand, breathe, pray, and step, not because he knew where to go, but because he trusted who had called, and slowly, in that unseen path, a new clarity was born. The land changed as Elias descended into a region unlike any he had known. The air grew damp, heavy with mist, and the blindfold around his eyes was soaked each morning with dew. Yet he did not remove it. He had learned by now that the truest things were not seen, but known in the soul. The valley was deep, carved by centuries of wind and sorrow. Dark cliffs loomed overhead like watching sentinels. Ravens cawed in circles far above, but Elias paid them no mind. He walked as one asleep to the world, but awake to something more ancient than stone. One evening, as the last of his bread crumbled between his fingers, he sat beside a jagged rock and whispered, "Father, I am empty." The silence that answered him felt heavier than before. It did not scold. It did not soothe. It simply was. Elias leaned back, letting the weight of his exhaustion press him into the earth. Hunger gnawed at him. The cold wrapped around his shoulders like a cloak of thorns. Then, in the stillness, he heard it. Not a word, not a whisper, a sound, faint, rhythmic, like breathing. Not his own. He turned his head slightly. There it was again, gentle, steady, the quiet presence of another being. His heart quickened. Had someone followed him? Was it a traveler? An animal? He dared not remove the cloth. Instead, he sat still, focusing every part of his awareness on that presence. Then it moved, not away, toward him, but there were no footsteps, no rustling of grass, just a presence that now pressed near, like warmth beside a flame. Elias could not explain what happened next, but in that moment, the burden of his loneliness lifted. The valley was still dark, the hunger still real, but something greater had drawn near. Without words, he understood. He is here. The presence did not speak in syllables or speech. It impressed truth upon Elias's soul. Thoughts that were not his own entered gently, as though passed from heart to heart. You do not walk alone. The words were not heard, they were received, like water into dry soul. Elias bowed his head and wept again, not from despair, but from joy so deep it could not be contained. He spoke aloud into the night, I have nothing left but trust. I cannot see the way, I do not know where you lead, but I will follow. And for the first time in many days, laughter gentle and deep rose from his chest. It was not the laughter of mockery or victory, but the laughter of release, of surrender. The next morning, Elias rose and continued his journey. His steps were slower now, not from weariness, but reverence. He no longer walked to reach a destination, he walked with someone. At times the presence faded again into silence, but Elias had learned silence does not mean absence. God often hides his voice to sharpen our faith. As he pressed on, the terrain began to rise, the valley gave way to rougher hills, to steeper climbs, and then one morning Elias paused and said, "It is time." Slowly he untied the cloth from around his eyes. At first he saw only brightness pure, undiluted light. Then shapes began to form, trees, stones, the curve of the earth beneath his feet. And far in the distance a mountain loomed, unlike any other. It seemed not to sit upon the land, but to rise through it like the spine of the earth reaching toward heaven. Elias knew this was where he was being led. He set his eyes upon the mountain and took his first step forward, not in blindness now, but in deeper sight. For true faith is not the absence of vision, it is the surrender of vision to something greater. The mountain stood like a sentinel of eternity, veiled in clouds and mystery. As Elias approached its pace, he felt the air grow thin, charged with unseen energy, as though every stone, every gust of wind carried the breath of God. He made camp beneath a ridge, sleeping under the stars with only his staff and cloak. Dreams came that night, strange and radiant. In them a figure stood on the mountain top, robed in light, calling his name with a voice like thunder wrapped in mercy. Elias, the voice said, "The path you seek does not lie on the ground, but in the yielding of your heart." He awoke at dawn, trembling. The sun had not yet crested the peak, but its light spilled like liquid gold across the slopes. Elias began to climb. Each step upward was more than a physical effort. The mountain tested not only his legs, but his will, his memories, his attachments. As he climbed, images flooded his mind, his childhood, his regrets, his pride, his fear of failure. All rose up like ghosts from the valley below, and one by one he released them. He let go of the need for answers. He let go of the pain of loneliness. He let go of the question, "Why me?" Each surrender was like shedding a weight. The climb grew steeper, but his soul grew lighter. At last, after hours that felt like days, Elias reached a plateau near the summit. The clouds parted above him, and he beheld something terrible and beautiful. A fire burned not of wood, nor of oil, but a flame that hovered, self-fed and consuming. It pulsed with holiness, not violent, yet unbearable to gaze upon directly. Elias fell to his knees, face to the earth. He did not speak. He did not need to. The fire spoke not in language, but in presence. It enveloped him, searched him, loved him. You have walked by faith, not by sight. Therefore you shall now see, not with eyes, but with spirit. Then the fire moved not toward him, but into him. A warmth entered his chest and filled his entire being. It was not a consuming fire, but a refining one. It burned away fear, pride, doubt, and left behind only truth. Elias gasped. Tears poured from his eyes, and he whispered, you are the God who sees me." And for the first time in his life, Elias saw not the mountain, not the valley, but the heart of God. Elias descended the mountain, not as the man who had climbed it. Something eternal had touched his soul. His eyes now beheld the world differently. Rocks shimmered with divine fingerprints, trees whispered psalms, even the wind seemed to carry echoes of heaven's breath. People he passed in the villages did not recognize him at first. He walked simply with calm steps and a quiet smile, but when he spoke, their hearts stirred. His words carried a weight they could not explain. "What do you see?" a beggar asked him one day. "I see God in you," Elias said, kneeling beside him. "And in this path you walk, though your feet bleed, you are not alone." And the beggar wept, for he had not been touched by kindness in years. Another time, a wealthy man mocked him. "Where are the signs of your God? You walk barefoot and hungry." Elias looked into his eyes and said, "When I had much, I could not hear him. Now I have nothing but him, and I hear him everywhere." The man grew silent. Elias did not build temples or write scrolls, but wherever he went, people found themselves awakened. They began to see through his silence, to listen between his pauses, to hunger not for what he gave but for what he carried. He told no one the full tale of the mountain. Some things are too sacred for speech, but he taught by his life that faith is not believing in the unseen once, but choosing it daily over comfort, over certainty, over control. The path he walked was not marked by stones or signs. It wound through deserts and cities, through laughter and pain. Yet he followed still, step by step, guided by a voice deeper than words. And when others asked him, "How do I find this path?" he would smile and reply, "You don't find it. You follow it, one step at a time, eyes closed, heart open, and he will meet you." Years passed, but Elias did not measure time the way others did. Seasons turned, the sun rose and fell, and villages changed, but the rhythm of his spirit stayed steady. To listen, to walk, to trust. One autumn morning, Elias came upon a river unlike any he had crossed before. It was not wide nor fast, but it shimmered with a light that came not from the sun. Birds did not fly overhead, and no sound of beasts disturbed the air. It was still achingly still, as though time had paused to honor the place. He knelt beside the water. His reflection shimmered, but behind it he saw not his face but another, familiar yet vast, gentle yet sovereign. It was the same presence he had felt in the valley, the same fire from the mountain. It was the face of the one he had followed. Elias took off his sandals. The ground felt warm beneath his feet. He whispered the words he had spoken at the beginning many years before, "I will come." He stepped into the water. It embraced him like light, not wet nor cold, but holy. And as he walked deeper, his body did not resist, his feet did not sink. He passed through the water like breath through wind. On the far side, the landscape changed. There were no thorns, no burden, no fear. A garden stretched before him like Eden reborn, trees heavy with fruit, a river clear as crystal, light that did not come from the sky, but from within everything. And standing at the gate, waiting, was the one he had followed by faith. They say a stranger once walked through the desert with a staff in his hand and fire in his eyes. They say he did not seek power, yet kings listened when he spoke. They say he did not write books, yet hearts were changed wherever he passed. He spoke little, But when he did, he often whispered the same phrase, "Walk by faith, not by sight." Some thought he was mad. Others thought him a prophet. But those who walked with him, even a little while, were never the same. When asked who he was, he would only smile. "I am just a man who followed a voice." His name was Elias ... and though his footprints have long vanished from the earth, his path remains for those willing to walk blindfolded into the unknown, guided not by what can be seen, but by the eternal whisper that calls from deep within, "Come."